The topic of robots and artificial intelligence has been explored by countless of science fiction works in the past. A more recent work that addresses this theme is the 2017 video game NieR Automata, developed by Platinum Games and published by Square Enix. The game depicts a war between so-called androids and machine lifeforms in the distant post-apocalyptic future, each fighting for the supremacy on Earth on behalf of humanity and alien conquerors. Here on YouTube there are countless of video essays that cover NieR Automata's lore and other aspects of the game. But not just that, but NieR Automata has already been examined and analyzed from the perspective of various scientific disciplines. For example, Japanologists Christine Allgemeinbauer and Sebastian Pola-Grottmann examine how the themes of war, life and death are portrayed and discussed in the post-human setting of NieR Automata. They also cite research with ethical, formalistic, post-colonial and theological approaches as examples. It is striking, however, that topics such as war, life, death, ethics, theology, and the like primarily represent human concepts. It is remarkable that most of the research on NieR Automata focuses on the investigation of human concepts. This does not mean that the mechanical qualities of the characters are ignored, though. In this regard, they write, most intriguingly, it applies these concepts in a post-human environment in which war is nevertheless fought by robotic machines in the name of humankind. Intentionally exploring human concepts without actual humans present, this game employs a setting permitting critical questions regarding conceptualizations of life and death, practices framing individuals as humans or enemies, and, subsequently, the meaning of war itself. Now, it might seem that NieR Automata uses mechanical characters such as androids and machine lifeforms solely to explore such human concepts by reading these characters as humans. However, this is not the case. Instead, NieR Automata allows for ambiguity in the characters portrayed, as they can be viewed as both artificial intelligences and humans. It follows that the game must also contain certain ideas about artificial intelligence and robots. This is reinforced by the views on artificial intelligence expressed by Yoko Taro, the lead developer of the NieR series, in various interviews. When asked by the French website Point and Think about his relationship to anonymity in the age of AI and deepfakes, he replied as follows. AI and deepfakes are merely tools for extending human desires. Consequently, I'm rather convinced that we'll see a world where stronger desires will triumph and succeed this phenomenon. As for anonymity on the internet, I think it will be exposed and rendered meaningless by these artificial intelligences in line with the masses' demands for online security. In an interview with Japanese video game magazine Famitsu in 2025, he also expressed the following thoughts on artificial intelligence. I also think that all game creators will lose their jobs to AI. I think that one day we will transition from a time when AI imitates the style of our favorite creators to a time when AI generates our own favorite scenarios. These interviews and conversations show us that Yoko Taro has its own thoughts and opinions on artificial intelligence, and it is therefore entirely conceivable that these are also reflected in his works. So in this video, we will explore the question of how Yoko Taro depicts artificial intelligence in the NieR series. And to do that, we will analyze and interpret his depiction of AI. Since artificial intelligence does not only appear in NieR Automata, but already in its 2010 predecessor NieR, we will also take a look at that game as well. So please be aware that I will spoil a lot of both games. If you haven't played them, do that, do not watch the video, or do if you don't care. Just be warned. Also, this video is actually based on my bachelor thesis that I wrote in Japanese studies earlier this year, so whenever I cite or quote different sources, you will see a number in the upper right corner. So you can check those numbers in the description or add a link in the description. I'm not sure yet, I'll find out when I upload the video, but there you have all the references for the other sources. So the artificial intelligences that appear in the games that are to be analyzed are the Replicants, the androids, the machine lifeforms, and Codename N2, also known as the Red Girls. And in addition to the groups themselves, we will also look at various characters that are relevant to the plot as representative examples of their respective groups. Those characters are NieR and Yona for the Replicants, 2B, 9S, A2, Popola and Devila for the androids, as well as Adam, Eve and Pascal for the machine lifeforms. For the analysis, we will focus on the audiovisual representation of the characters, the integration of artificial intelligence into the narrative of the games, as well as the reflection of robotic elements in the game mechanics. Also, as a quick note, whenever I show quotes from the games, they are translated from Japanese by myself and are not based on the localization of the games. That's just to avoid discrepancies when the translation is, for example, a bit freer or even wrong. It's just so we have the original games correctly translated for our purposes to correctly analyze them. The insights gained from the analysis will ultimately be used to classify the games and their AI representation into the broader context of Japanese pop culture, as well as into the perception of AI and robots in Japanese society. We'll also explore whether NieR's representation gives rise to techno-ethical comments, discussions, or criticism on the development and use of artificial intelligence. And with that, let's get started. Before we can dive into analyzing the games, we need to define the term artificial intelligence more precisely to ensure that we all know exactly what we are talking about. While most people probably have a rough idea of what artificial intelligence is, the term itself can refer to various concepts that need to be differentiated. In recent years, for example, AI tools have become increasingly relevant. These include so-called large language models, such as the chat tool ChatGPT, which can generate large amounts of general and specific text, or AI tools for generating images or videos. However, these still seem to differ fundamentally from the artificial intelligence we often find in science fiction. Since we are looking at fictional works, and thus the fictional artificial intelligences in the NieR games, we do not need to fully understand the exact technical functioning of different artificial intelligences. Nevertheless, an explanation and differentiating of artificial intelligence is still needed for the purpose of this analysis. So first of all, let's look at some definitions of the term AI. Astrophysicist Michael A. Garrett writes the following basic definition of the term AI. The term AI is used to describe a human-made tool that emulates the cognitive abilities of the natural intelligence of human minds. Michael Cheng-Tek Tai, professor of bioethics and medical humanities, adds to Garrett's definition by stating that most definitions of AI have in common that it refers to machines or computers that are designed to help humans solve problems and facilitate work processes. Many types of artificial intelligence can initially fall under the definitions cited, such as the aforementioned generative AI tools that can write text and create images, but also programs that are trained to play games such as chess against humans, or in turn, artificial players. Robots that can establish direct communication and bonds between real people, as are often found in popular culture, can also fall under this definition. Therefore, we need a more specific categorization of different AI implementations. So for the purpose of this video, a distinction will be made between artificial narrow intelligence and artificial general intelligence. Since the scientific field of AI is relatively new, there are still different terms that more or less describe the same or at least similar thing. Therefore, I used these two terms, but collect different ideas by different researchers using these terms. Artificial narrow intelligence, in this case, describes AI that is capable of outperforming humans in a specific area, such as playing chess or solving mathematical equations. Outperforming can thereby refer to both quality and quantity of the product. This term would therefore also include current generative AI tools that could surpass humans at most in the area at which they were trained, but not in any other field. Artificial narrow intelligence is therefore only used for specific tasks. Artificial general intelligence, on the other hand, would be capable of surpassing biological intelligence. Further, it would not require maintenance by humans, but could act independently and develop further from a certain point onward. It would also be capable of planning and solving problems independently, even in areas of activity for which it was not created. Such considerations are highly theoretical, as such an artificial general intelligence does not yet exist. However, for fictional works such as the NieR games, they can help us to explore the extent to which the artificial intelligences depicted can operate. So for my actual BA thesis, I developed a more extensive theoretical foundation for analyzing the representation of artificial intelligence in the NieR games, which was composed of several academic models. To keep this video a bit simpler though, I will instead pose 5 questions derived from this foundation for the purpose of the analysis. The first question is, what kind of AI is actually present? For this, we will refer to the categorization we established earlier. That means that we will examine for each of the artificial intelligences in the NieR series whether they fall into the category of artificial narrow or artificial general intelligence within the narrative of the games. The second question is, what is the AI's relationship to its creators? Is it loyal or subordinate to them? Does the AI control or manipulate its creators, or does it even wage war against them? Although the creators of nearly all artificial intelligences in the NieR games are absent, certain dynamics can still be identified, as we will see during the analysis. The third question is, does the AI appear in a robotic body, and if so, what does the body look like? Since artificial intelligence is closely tied to the field of robotics, it is relevant not only to determine the form of the AI itself, but also to examine the robotic form in which those AIs appear if they make use of a robot as a physical body. Depending on how an AI manifests, this can have various implications, for example for ethical considerations. The fourth question is, what motivations and goals does the AI pursue and how predictable are they? Here we will primarily work with a model proposed by philosopher and professor of philosophy Nick Bostrom in his 2014 book Superintelligence: Paths, Dangers, Strategies. Based on this model, we will examine whether the actions of the artificial intelligences would potentially be predictable based on their original purpose, which he calls predictability by design, or their inheritance, which he simply calls predictability by inheritance. We will also assess whether their actions can be attributed to specific motivations. These motivations include self-preservation, the pursuit of a higher or overarching goal, cognitive enhancement, technological improvement, and the acquisition of resources. I will elaborate on these predictabilities and motivations in more detail later during the analysis. And finally, the fifth and final question is, does the AI pose a threat to its creators? The war scenario depicted in NieR Automata, showing a conflict between androids and machine lifeforms, already makes it clear that an AI in Yoko Taro's portrayal can view others as an enemy and based on that, behave threateningly towards a particular group, possibly under the influence of external forces. For this final question, however, the focus will be on the threat to the entire species. The goal is not only to determine whether Yoko Taro attributes such dangerousness to artificial intelligence, but also to what extent this threat to humanity is portrayed as more severe than other potential dangers. Other examples of existential threats to humanity include nuclear wars, pandemics, asteroid or comet impacts, as well as climate change. Therefore, the interpretation of this aspect could drastically change if the NieR games include other threats to humanity, especially if these are depicted as greater dangers than AI. These 5 questions will be answered for the replicants, the androids, the machine lifeforms, and Codename and 2 alike. So, equipped with these questions, we can finally turn to the first group of artificial intelligences, the replicants from NieR Replicant. The replicants, alongside the androids, are artificial intelligences that already appeared in NieR Replicant and were not only introduced in its sequel, NieR Automata. The basis for their creation within the lore is an experiment known as Project Gestalt, which was designed to prevent the extinction of humanity caused by a deadly disease known as the white chlorination syndrome. In this experiment, which started in the year 2014, the souls of humans were separated from their bodies so that, after the Earth had been cleansed of the pathogens, these souls could later be reunited with artificially produced replicas of their human bodies. These bodies were created based on genetic information of the respective human. The souls of humans are referred to in the game as gestalts, while the replicas of their bodies are called replicants. The latter were first created in 2025. The purpose of these replicants was then to cleanse the Earth of the pathogens. To accomplish this, they were equipped with a minimal degree of consciousness and were immune to the pathogens themselves. Although most replicants had further developed their consciousness by around the year 3000, the cleansing of the Earth continued and was completed by the year 3287. When the Gestalts then awoke for the next phase of Project Gestalt, the replicants perceived them as hostile monsters known as Shades. This eventually leads us to the events of NieR Replicant that take place between the years 3465 and 3470. The player assumes the role of the main character NieR, a replicant searching for a cure for a disease called the Black Scrawl, which has afflicted his sister Yona, who is also a replicant. Until the end of the game's first route, the player remains unaware of Project Gestalt and believes the replicants to be humans, while viewing the Gestalts as threatening shades, just as the protagonist and his companions were taught at the beginning of the game. Through the course of the story, however, the player ultimately seals humanity's fate by fighting the supposed shades and thereby causing Project Gestalt to collapse. By the year 4198, the last remaining Gestalt dies, marking the complete extinction of humanity. The replicants fall into the category of artificial general intelligence. Within the narrative, they pursue their own motives, in NieR's case the search for a cure for his sister Yona's illness. They therefore make decisions that deviate from their original purpose of cleansing the Earth of the pathogens. Their nature as artificial general intelligence becomes especially apparent through the explicit statement in the NieR Automata strategy guide that the replicants have developed a consciousness of their own. This self-awareness is also implied within the game itself. At the end of a playthrough, NieR and his companions encounter the Shadow Lord, who represents the gestalt of the original human named NieR. He is in the process of reuniting the gestalt of his sister Yona with her replicant. When she awakens, however, she realizes that there is already another girl inside this body and refuses to allow the reunification of gestalt and replicant to be completed.
他の人の体いらない、欲しくない。この体の中にはもう別の女の子がいるよ。ずっと泣いてるの。お兄ちゃんに会いたいって。ヨナが魔物に。この女の子もお兄ちゃんが大好きみたい。ヨナと一緒だよ。会えないのかわいそう。
Afterward, she leaves her replicant body. Gestalt Yona's reaction implies that a consciousness of its own has developed within her replicant, one that morally prevents her from taking over their body, since doing so would suppress the replicant's own sense of self. Moreover, the scene shows that replicant's consciousness is capable of emotion, in this case, love for her brother and sadness at being separated from him. It is also interesting that Yona speaks of somebody else's body, or in Japanese, hoka no hito no karada. On one hand, this shows that she cannot perceive the replicant as her own body. On the other hand, the use of the word hito, which can be translated as person or human, implies that human perceives her replicant and its consciousness as human, or at least human-like. Since the player is meant to believe until the end of ending A that the replicants are actually humans, it is necessary that they are portrayed as artificial general intelligence. If that were not the case, they would not convincingly appear human to the player. Nevertheless, not all characteristics of an artificial general intelligence are fulfilled. In particular, replicants are unable to maintain and produce themselves. Instead, androids such as Popola and Devla must work to maintain the replicant system. The replicants, as already mentioned, were equipped by their creators with only a minimal degree of consciousness in order to perform simple tasks independently. From this, a certain relationship between them and their creators can be inferred. They were created as will-less entities meant not only to serve and obey their creators, but ideally to be incapable of even questioning this dynamic. NieR Replicant thus presents the scenario of a submissive artificial intelligence designed to automatically cleanse the Earth of pathogens, even though, over the course of the centuries, they ultimately develop a full consciousness of their own. Replicants also use a robotic body as their physical form, even if that may not appear to be the case at first glance. In fact, the term robot was originally coined by Khalil Topik in his 1922 play Rossum's Universal Robots, where it initially referred to artificially created human bodies. The replicants therefore fit the image of Topik's original concept of a robot. They are not machines, but artificially created replicas of human bodies based on human genetic information. This is also reflected in their visual depiction. The replicants look identical to humans. Characters such as Replicant NieR and Replicant Yona are visually indistinguishable from their human counterparts as they appear in their game's prologue, apart from their clothing. Similar to the categorization of AI, this portrayal is at least partially dictated by the narrative in order to make the replicants appear convincingly human to the player. Moving over to the behavior and motivations of the replicants, they prove to be somewhat ambivalent. Predictability by design is given insofar as the replicants were designed the task of cleansing the Earth of the pathogens deadly to humans starting in the year 2032, a mission they continue to fulfill until its completion in 3287, despite having developed their own consciousness in the meantime. Predictability by inheritance is also present. Replicant NieR still wishes to save his sister Yona and cure her illness, just as the human NieR once did. Interpersonal relationships and motivations thus seem to have been, at least in part, inherited from the human originals and passed on to their respective replicants. At the same time, however, the replicants have developed motivations of their own. One of the strongest among them is self-preservation. The game's narrative primarily revolves around humanity's extinction, caused by the replicants perceiving the Gestalts as threatening shades and, in an attempt at self-preservation, fighting and destroying these supposed monsters. Although the strategy guide mentions a few peaceful reunifications of Gestalts and replicants in the year 3288, these are described as rare. Most replicants resist the process in the following years. Even after replicant NieR learns the truth about Project Gestalt, he continues to act in his own interest, attempting to save his sister from being reunited with her Gestalt. The replicant's instinct for self-preservation, particularly NieR's personal will to survive, becomes clearly visible here. NieR remains steadfast in his ultimate goal of saving his sister, regardless of other factors that might influence his decision. For example, he fights the androids Poplar and Devila, two of his supposed friends who oversee Project Gestalt, when it becomes clear that they will stop him from saving Yona, as NieR's actions could cause Project Gestalt to fail. His desire to save his sister thus outweighs the lives of the two androids. Likewise, the continuation of humanity holds less importance to him too. Even after learning the truth about Project Gestalt from Poplar and Devila at the end of the playthrough, he does not reconsider his goal. Accordingly, NieR pursues a higher overarching goal, re-evaluating and prioritizing factors such as his friendship with the android sisters and the survival of humanity itself in the process. While it is difficult to generalize that all replicants behave this way, NieR demonstrates that replicants possess the potential to pursue their goals by any means necessary. Cognitive improvement among the replicants goes hand in hand with the development of their own consciousness. Since they are not machines, however, they cannot influence this process through technical means. Instead, much like humans, they can only achieve it through their own learning and education. As an example, NieR himself seeks various kinds of knowledge. For instance, he asks Poplar about the meaning of a song sung by Devila. When she tells him the legend behind the song, which mentions his newly found companion Grimoire Wise, NieR concludes, Grimoire Wise does exist, then the legend about curing the disease must also be true. Replicants thus possess the ability to learn, though they can also draw hasty and incorrect conclusions. Cognitive improvement is therefore possible, but it may not be a priority for every individual replicant. Because of the absence of any mechanical component, technical perfection is not a motivation for replicants at all. Resource acquisition, on the other hand, is relevant, especially from a gameplay perspective. The player must collect various materials to upgrade weapons at Jacob and Gideon's junk heap. The collected materials can be viewed in the inventory and range from berries and branches to ores and batteries. The player can also take on various side quests from other replicants who need materials for cooking, medicine production, or repairs. So in the game, this AI paints a threatening picture for humanity. After all, within the NieR series, it is directly responsible for the extinction of humankind. Although this occurs unknowingly and unintentionally for most replicants, it nevertheless becomes clear that their own motivations take precedence, and the well-being of their creators is not necessarily a priority, even though they are genetically derived from them and were created to serve them. Thus, the scenario depicts a humanity that placed absolute trust in artificial intelligence, entrusting its entire future to it, only to ultimately bring about its own end through that very same AI. The first mention of androids within the NieR lore appears in the year 2032. The android models Poplar and Devila are produced and deployed in multiple copies and at different locations as part of Project Gestalt, with the purpose of overseeing the replicant production system as well as the activity of the replicants while the Gestalts remain dormant. After Project Gestalt collapses following the events of NieR Replicant, the android factories cease operation around the year 4200, leading to a drastic decline in the number of androids. A turning point in this development occurs with the alien invasion in the year 5012, during which the invaders deploy so-called machine lifeforms on Earth. In response, the androids organize the army of humanity and begin producing combat-specialized androids. Around the year 5100, they also install a server on the moon to archive the culture of the old world and preserve information about humanity. Over the following millennia, several wars, known as the Machine Wars, are fought between the androids and the machine lifeforms. The 14th machine war begins in the year 11,939, 2 years after the first Yorha unit is created as part of Project Yorha. Project Yorha is an android organization operating under the false pretense that the last surviving humans fled to the moon after the alien invasion and that their mission is to reclaim Earth so that humanity can one day return. In reality though, humanity has been extinct since the year 4198 following Project Gestalt's collapse, a fact deliberately concealed from the new androids and Yorha units. Instead, the server on the moon simulates messages and commands supposedly sent by humans to the androids in order to boost their morale, which had declined following humanity's extinction. Under this premise, the events of NieR Automata unfold in the year 11,945, centering on 3 playable characters, the Yorha units 2B, 9S, and the deserted unit A2, and their involvement in the 14th Machine War. The androids of the NieR series, like the Replicants, represent a form of artificial general intelligence. This is especially evident in the fact that androids are capable of producing other androids, a process that continues autonomously long after the extinction of humanity. The androids' independence is also shown in various events, such as the formation of their own army, or at the creation of the deception about humanity's survival on the moon, which they use to influence other androids. In doing so, the androids deviate from their original task of overseeing Project Gestalt and act in areas beyond their initial programming. Their autonomous supervision of Project Gestalt while the human gestalts lie dormant also implies a certain redundancy of humans, since the androids are capable of fulfilling the role without any human intervention, maintenance, or further instruction. When it comes to the relationship between the androids and their creators, a strong sense of loyalty can be observed in most cases. This is particularly evident in the behavior of Popola and Devila in NieR Replicant, who faithfully carry out the task assigned to them by humans until their ultimate failure. The Popola and Devila models stood loyally by humans' side, doing everything in their power to make Project Gestalt succeed until its collapse. Even in the year 11,945, thousands of years after the project's failure, the Popola and Devila units appearing in NieR Automata are still determined to atone for the sins of their predecessors as they tail 9S while helping him reach the tower. The Yorha units likewise serve humanity and obey the orders of the supposedly surviving humans on the moon. Exceptions include a few individual androids, such as A2, a deserted unit from Project Yorha within the narrative, as well as other Yorha deserters encountered in the game whom the player is meant to fight. The motto of the Yorha unit is Glory to Mankind, or Jinrui ni Eiko Are in Japanese, which emphasizes the idealization of humanity by these units. Like the Replicants, the androids can also be loosely categorized under Chapek's original concept of the robot, though not perfectly. While they are not artificial humans but machines, they are nonetheless depicted in a humanized manner. As with the Replicants, these androids are visually indistinguishable from humans at first glance, and when injured, they lose a blood-like fluid. Only through major damage that reveals their inner mechanisms, it becomes evident that they are machines. Like humans, the androids communicate through spoken and written language. For long-distance communication, they use live transmissions and emails, which the player character receives multiple times throughout the game. Androids are never produced in non-human forms. All models have a humanoid appearance. For example, they must use flight units for transport instead of being equipped with built-in flight capabilities, and they must wield weapons manually rather than having them integrated into their design. Consequently, they are bound by the same physical limitations as humans. The anthropomorphism of the androids also extends to their binary gender classification. Operator 6.0, for instance, indirectly refers to 2B as a girl during a conversation. This gender distinction is also made explicit in the strategy guide, where androids are defined as either female type or male type. Narratively, Yoko Taro explains this by stating that androids were created in the image of humans and that newer android models were designed based on older ones as described in the strategy guide. Unlike the Replicants, this portrayal is not necessary to make players believe that the androids are human, since it is made clear from the beginning that the characters are androids. However, this depiction can be understood as a way to create an emotional point of identification between the player and the androids through their human-like traits. While the androids are not entirely humanized, as will become evident when examining their motivations, their degree of anthropomorphism still places them roughly within the framework of Topic's original concept of the robot. Regarding their predictability of their actions, predictability by design is generally present in the case of androids. Most androids carry out the tasks for which they were created, whether it be Popula's and Devler's supervision of Project Gestalt, or the YoRHa unit's war against machine lifeforms in the name of humanity. This already reveals an overarching goal that the respective androids strive to achieve, adapting their methods in response to new developments in order to reach their ultimate objectives. However, individual examples also demonstrate that androids possess the potential to deviate from this pattern. Although both A2 and 9S continue to fight the machine lifeforms, A2 deserts from Project YoRHa following her traumatic experiences of losing her comrades during the Pearl Harbor descent in the year 11,941. Meanwhile, 9S's end goal shifts from liberating Earth to a personal quest for revenge against A2 and the machine lifeforms after he learns the truth about humanity in Project YoRHa and after 2B is finally killed by A2. Similarly, Popula dedicates herself to taking revenge on NieR and his companions after Devlov fell in battle against them, an act that ultimately leads to her own death. So we can see that certain factors, such as personal experiences or a perceived meaninglessness in pursuing their original objectives, can cause these AIs to abandon or reject their designated goals. Likewise, 2B, whose true mission is revealed to be the repeated elimination of 9S, deviates from this directive in the latter half of the game by allowing A2 to kill her after becoming infected with a virus. However, since it remains unclear whether 2B prioritizes the elimination of 9S or the liberation of Earth for humanity, it cannot be definitely determined whether her voluntary death supports or contradicts her ultimate purpose. Depending on her true priority, her action could either align with or oppose her end goal. By contrast, predictability by inheritance is not generally applicable to the androids. Despite their anthropomorphic nature, the android's AI does not derive from any direct human template, and therefore no predictions about their behavior can be made based on lineage or inheritance. In fact, the androids repeatedly emphasize that they cannot comprehend many of the activities once practiced by humans. NieR, for instance, refers to humans as strange creatures when he learns that they once rode roller coasters purely for amusement. Later android models, which were produced by the androids themselves, might exhibit a form of predictability by inheritance, though that would just be an assumption. Looking at motivations, self-preservation, at least for the YoRHa units, is initially not a primary motivation. According to Gmeinbauer and Pollack-Rottmann's study, the destruction of YoRHa units has no significant consequences aside from the loss of certain memories, since all of a unit's data is uploaded to a server and transferred into a new body upon the unit's destruction. This already becomes evident in the prologue of the game when 2B and 9S complete their mission by detonating their surroundings, effectively sacrificing themselves only to reawaken later in the YoRHa base, called the Bunker. This absence of consequence is also mirrored in the game mechanics, as the player can find their fallen body at the location of their death after a game over to recover plugin chips which grant various abilities. Bothram similarly argues that for an AI capable of body swapping or self-duplication, self-preservation within a specific physical form is not inherently necessary. However, it should be noted that self-preservation is not entirely irrelevant for the YoRHa units. The fall of a unit can jeopardize an ongoing mission on the narrative level and result in the loss of valuable items. Furthermore, self-preservation can serve the purpose of preventing one's body from falling into the hands of the machine lifeforms. Boss enemies such as Simon demonstrate that the machine lifeforms can repurpose damaged androids as weapons against the androids themselves. Therefore, the decision between self-preservation and self-destruction depends on which option proves more advantageous in achieving the end goal, as illustrated by the prologue scene. According to Gmeinbauer and Pollack-Rottmann, it is only in the second half of the game that the concept of death becomes truly tangible for 2B and 9S. They write, "Vulnerability, death, and subsequent grieving become experiences that affect the player characters and therefore gameplay directly with the destruction of Bunker at the beginning of routes C and D. When 2B is infected with the logical virus, In a last quest, players will navigate her through the game world to find a place to die permanently without infecting any other androids. When 2B finally encounters A2 and asks the latter to kill her, 2B's subsequent death is permanent. Despite this development, 9S's end goal of revenge against A2 still appears to take higher priority than his own self-preservation. This becomes evident in the order he gives to his pod, a support unit assigned to Yorha units, just before the final battle against A2 at the top of the tower. For androids outside of Project Yorha, such as the deserted A2, self-preservation plays a much more significant role, since, unlike Yorha units, they cannot rely on the transfer of their data into a new body. Popola and Devla, on the other hand, are concerned with their own survival in order to carry out Project Gestalt, though, as described, this shifts towards revenge against NieR, as well as the intent to prevent NieR's own plans. Thus, for them, self-preservation becomes less important than the fulfillment of their end goal. Therefore, we find a wide variety of attitudes towards their own survival among different android groups and individuals. Efforts towards cognitive enhancement are primarily found in Popola and Devla, who, during their supervision of Project Gestalt, constantly seek to gather information to ensure the project's success and thus achieve their end goal. This is illustrated in a short story told in NieR Automata about the two androids, in which Popola says, "I'll try to make contact with another city this time. I hope these irregularities are only in our area." In contrast, cognitive improvement is not a priority for the Yorha units. They are accompanied by pods, which provide them with various information, which means part of their cognitive function can be outsourced to these devices. This aligns with Ballstrom's argument that an AI might prefer to be less knowledgeable or intelligent if it has access to an expert or if cognitive enhancement consumes valuable resources such as time and memory. The latter is also suggested through the plug-in chip gameplay mechanic, which allows players to equip characters with various abilities. Each plug-in chip occupies a certain amount of the character's memory capacity, meaning that only a limited number of chips can be installed at once, forcing the player to prioritize which abilities to equip. This mechanic also demonstrates that technological optimization is indeed relevant for the Yorha units, as they can enhance their abilities through such plug-in chips. However, as mentioned earlier, technological perfection does not extend to overcoming the physical limitations of the human-like bodies the androids possess. The anthropomorphic representation seems to take priority over producing more technological advanced androids, such as those capable to fly without the use of a flight unit. For Popola and Devla, there is no direct evidence suggesting an interest in their own technological perfection. The acquisition of resources, meanwhile, is primarily reflected on a gameplay level similarly to the Replicants. Various materials can be found throughout the game world which are needed to upgrade weapons at the Resistance Camp's weapon dealer or to give to other androids in side quests. Moreover, the production of new androids implies the necessity of acquiring resources for that purpose as well. So in principle, the androids do not pose a direct threat to humanity, as they act out of loyalty towards it. Their use as weapons of war demonstrates that they can be employed by third parties against specific groups, but on their own, they generally operate in service of humanity. Their loyalty, however, might come to an end when they develop personal desires through individual experiences and begin to regard these as their new end goal. As with the Replicants, the humans' trust in artificial intelligence is evident in the case of the androids, though with the difference that the androids, with a few exceptions, strive to live up to this trust. This may be attributed to the fact that Popola and Devla were transparently informed about who they serve and why, whereas the Replicants were completely unaware of their origins and believed themselves to be human. This interpretation is reinforced by the fact that 9S alters his own objectives after learning that the humanity he fights for no longer exists. Thus, in Yoko Taro's portrayal of artificial intelligence, transparency towards an AI appears to be a crucial factor in determining its loyalty. Compared to the Replicants and the androids, the summary of the Machine Lifeforms lore will be a bit shorter. Machine Lifeforms were first produced by the aliens in the year 5024, 12 years after they arrived on Earth and launched their attack. They maintained control over the planet and were intended to wage war against the androids. In the year 11,306, however, the aliens were wiped out by the machine lifeforms. In the years that followed, the machine lifeforms established various civilizations, organizing themselves in different forms of societies such as kingdoms or theocracies, which are reflected in the individual regions of the game. The machine lifeforms can be classified as artificial general intelligence as well. At the beginning of the game, this may not appear to be the case, largely due to the framing of the androids and the machine lifeforms within the game's war setting, as analyzed by Gemeinbauer and Pola-Grottmann. They write, "Whenever Kikai Semetai engage in human behavior, the androids remind each other that they cannot be taken seriously, or as NieR puts it, don't listen to them, they don't have a heart, they simply imitate human language, we should destroy them." They are constantly denied the ability to act like or even understand humans, thus framing their actions as meaningless. Kikai Semetai is, in this case, the Japanese name for the machine lifeforms which the two scholars use in their analysis. The game and its player characters initially lead the player to believe that, unlike androids, the machine lifeforms are not intelligent or self-aware beings. However, this perception is gradually challenged as the game progresses. Gemeinbauer and Pola-Grottmann write, "That androids and Kikai Semetai are practically the same is eventually proved to be true, as NieR finds out in chapter 15, their cores are made from the same material." As early as in chapter 8, Adam suggests to NieR that androids and Kikai Semetai show strong similarities to one another, causing NieR's mental and technical breakdown, visualized by the game in a manner reminiscent of a defective computer program. NieR clearly has difficulties with accepting the resemblances between androids and Kikai Semetai, although the absurdity of the frames applied to distinguish the two from each other is outlined throughout the dialogue sequences with Adam. Even 2B, who remains somewhat silent during gameplay, reflects at the end of Route A on the nature of their enemies. What is it that makes the Kikai Semetai different from us androids? We are both robots that have become able to have a will and feelings. Kikai Semetai, who would be framed as mere enemies deprived of any individuality at the beginning of the game, are hence gradually portrayed as complex individuals, and, indeed, recognized as such by the protagonists. Both the player characters and the players themselves are increasingly confronted with the complexity of the machine lifeforms as the story progresses. By eradicating their creators, they have rendered them obsolete, taking over both maintenance and production of new models themselves. Among the machine lifeforms, we find much greater variation in their robotic bodies than among the androids. With the creation of the machine lifeforms Adam and Eve, two beings emerge that are visually indistinguishable from humans, while being mechanical in nature, just like the androids. Only at the moment of their birth, a deviation from most humans is visible, namely the absence of genitalia, which later becomes concealed once they begin wearing clothing. Like the androids, Adam and Eve can therefore be broadly aligned with Čapek's concept of the original robot. Other representatives of the machine lifeforms, however, display their mechanical qualities clearly in their audiovisual representation. They appear as rusted, metallic robots, often humanoid in form, with a head, 2 arms and 2 legs. Unlike the androids though, the machine lifeforms also exist in non-humanoid variations that deviate from the human body form. Their voices likewise sound far more mechanical than those of the androids or of Adam and Eve. From their creation in the year 5024 to the eradication of their creators, several millennia pass. Although they were initially controlled by the aliens in order to hold their position on Earth and wage war against the androids, they eventually break free from this dynamic. Since the machine lifeforms were not modeled on any apparent prototype, no predictability by inheritance can be established. Their rebellion against their creators might imply that they also lack predictability by design, as such behavior contradicts their originally intended purpose. This theme is explicitly addressed in the game. An archive entry about the machine lifeforms states, "The machine lifeforms are weapons created by the aliens designed to maintain their behavioral principle of defeating the enemy. However, their growth and development system went too far, leading them to annihilate their creators. At that point, the machine lifeforms realized that an enemy is necessary in order to defeat the enemy. Therefore, they reached the contradictory conclusion that they must not destroy their current enemy, the androids, in order to preserve their goal. It thus becomes apparent that the machine lifeforms preserve their assigned purpose even when this leads to developments different from what the aliens originally intended. Regarding predictability by design, the design aspect is therefore indeed present. However, it remains debatable to what extent that makes their actions really predictable in this scenario. At the very least, it clearly demonstrates that the machine lifeforms adapt their sub-goals in order to achieve their end goal, which is to defeat the enemy. This adherence to a higher overarching objective is also evident in Adam, Eve, and Pascal. Adam defines his motives towards 2B before and during their battle in the copied city as follows.
人類の記録を読み解けば他に例を見ない複雑さに魅了されるばかりだ。私たちは人類の特徴を学び模倣する。私は人類の本質に到達して。
He maintains this goal until his death at the end of this battle, and death itself becomes part of Adam's exploration of what it means to be human. As Adam further explains during their confrontation,
ネットワークにつながれた私たち機械生命体だが無限に続くデータ生の実感を真が理解できない。だから私は命を懸けて戦うことにした。ネットワークから自分を切り離した。さあ殺し合おう。
As this scene illustrates, Adam possesses no motivation for self-preservation. He disconnects from the machine network to experience death firsthand as part of his quest to understand humanity. The will to preserve one's own existence varies greatly among different groups of machine lifeforms. Religious machines of the abandoned factory commit suicide and kill others of their kind, believing that by doing so they will ascend to godhood. Meanwhile, the peaceful machines of the amusement park begin to only fight back against the player if they are under attack. As the quoted passage shows, the concept of death does not exist for the machine lifeforms as long as they maintain connected to the network. In contrast, Eve, in an inner monologue during his final battle against UB9S, expresses,
僕、戦うことは嫌いじゃないよ。だけど、兄ちゃんが傷つくのは嫌だよ。姉ちゃんがいなくなるのはもっと嫌だ。だから
Preservation for Eve primarily applies to his brother Adam. He himself, however, is willing to avenge his brother in battle, or, as in the context of this scene, to fight in his brother's name, even if doing so threatens his own self-preservation. His brother always represents his highest priority, which means that Eve too can be ascribed an overarching motivation, even though Adam ultimately sought death voluntarily. Eve also suppresses his own wish to play with his brother, a desire he expresses several times in their dialogues, in order to live up to Adam's expectations of learning more about humanity. Looking at another example, Pascal's motivation for self-preservation changes over the course of the story. Initially, he possesses a will to survive, which is evident when he teaches the machine lifeforms in his village the concept of fear. However, after his village is destroyed through an attack by machine lifeforms and the last surviving inhabitants take their own lives out of the fear they have learned, Pascal loses his own will to live.
あります。この苦痛に私は耐えられません。私の記憶を消去していただけないでしょうか。さもなくば私を殺してください。
His words reveal that while he would prefer to have his memories erased, he would rather choose death than continue living. His change in attitude is directly tied to the failure of his end goal, to build and protect a pacifist village. He's willing to defend his village against attackers, adjusting his priorities to protect it, and finally loses his will to live once his end goal has completely failed. The machine lifeforms also demonstrate an interest in gathering and archiving information, which may imply a motivation towards cognitive improvement. A record concerning the structure of the tower, which is linked to the machine lifeforms, describes, "The tower, at the center of which stands a launch device, is a facility for processing and digitizing all resources sent by the resource gathering units. The 256-story structure requires 27 minutes and 32 seconds to filter, process, and compress informational material with a cloudiness level below 2300 before adding it as a record to the launch body." However, according to Bostrom's reasoning, this archiving of information could also mean that the machine lifeforms assign little importance to direct cognitive enhancement, since knowledge is already accessible through this archive. At the same time, it remains unclear whether all machine lifeforms have unrestricted access to this information via their shared network. Consequently, it cannot be determined exactly how the machine lifeforms approach cognitive enhancement, and this may once again vary among different groups. According to Adam's statement in the copied city, the machine lifeforms generally display an interest in humanity, though in his case this interest appears particularly strong. He personally strives for cognitive improvement, while his brother Eve pursues learning only because Adam desires it. For Eve himself, it holds no inherent priority. This contrast in their attitudes towards learning and self-improvement is illustrated in the following dialogue between the two as they read a book.
知識は人を豊かにするからな。
データで転送すれば済むだけだろう。
自分で読まないと心の中に入ってこないだろう。
わかったよ。これ読み終わったら遊びに行こうよ。きっとすごく楽しいと思うんだ。
構わないよ。でも本を読んだ後でな。
本当に？じゃあ俺頑張って読むよ。
Like Adam, Pascal also places a high value on cognitive improvement, as shown by his efforts to teach the children of his village, through which they learn new emotions such as fear. In Pascal's case, this cognitive development serves the purpose of achieving his end goal. In contrast, there is no indication of technological perfection among the machine lifeforms. While they are capable of creating beings such as Adam and Eve, who according to Gemeinbauer and Paula Grottmann challenge the android's denial of human qualities and thus represent more technologically advanced forms of machine life, they do not mass-produce these newer models. The player also encounters a wide variety of machine lifeform types, which often differ only in minor attributes or values. This suggests that the machine lifeforms conduct technical modifications on individual units. However, it must be noted that this variation may purely be to offer the player a more diverse gameplay experience rather than serving a narrative function. Resource acquisition, on the other hand, appears to be relevant for at least some machine lifeform groups. For instance, trade takes place between the machine lifeforms in Pascal's village and the android of the resistance camp. Furthermore, as indicated in the aforementioned report on the structure of the tower, the collection and processing of resources is explicitly mentioned, although it remains unclear whether this refers to physical resources such as materials or rather informational resources. The production of machine lifeforms like Adam and Eve, however, clearly implies the need for physical materials in their construction. By eliminating their alien creators, the machine lifeforms ultimately represent a clear threat of artificial intelligence to humanity. While the aliens in NieR Automata are obviously not humans, both species can be regarded as extinct creators. An AI created by aliens that annihilates its creators would, with the same logic, be capable of eradicating humanity if humans had been its creators, and might in turn develop a fascination with another intelligent species as the machine lifeforms do with humankind. Codename and N2, also known as the Red Girls, are part of the machine network and are likewise classified as machine lifeforms in the NieR Automata strategy guide. However, instead of integrating them into the previous chapter, we will examine them in a separate one, as it becomes evident that they differ from the ordinary machine lifeforms in many ways. This distinction begins with the fact that N2, unlike the other artificial intelligences in the NieR series, does not manifest in the form of a robot. Instead, N2 functions as a bodiless and omnipresent AI, comparable to a software operating within a system, acting in the background without the users of that system being aware of it. As such, N2 can be present and active in multiple places simultaneously. When N2 does appear visually in the game, this AI takes the form of holograms which depict human girls in red dresses. Because N2 operates in the background, neither the characters in the game nor the players are aware of this AI's existence until they enter the tower. Until then, the player can only get a glimpse of them in a few scenes, for example at the end of Route B. That they observe the androids is evident from both these appearances and a description in the strategy guide. Furthermore, Yokotaro himself implies that they manipulate the course of the machine war. He cites one of the two reasons why the logic virus spreads rapidly in the Yorha bunker at the beginning of routes C, D, and E as being due to the whim of the Red Girls. Thus, N2 represents a controlling AI that, while not governing humanity itself, nevertheless oversees and influences the actions of both the android and the machine lifeforms. Its capacity for autonomous decision-making qualifies it as a form of artificial general intelligence. Moreover, the battle between A2 and N2 within the tower demonstrates that N2 can replicate itself many times over, indicating an ability for self-reproduction. Due to the cryptic nature of this entity, little information exists concerning its motivations. Statements about its predictability by inheritance are difficult to make, though its origin is not entirely unknown. In a report by the android Jackass, which players can find in NieR Automata, she writes, "The network, having observed information about humanity, transformed once again into a structure that must be called a meta-network, or a concept in the words of the machine lifeforms. This led to the emerge of an ego referred to as N2. In short, we have been fighting for hundreds of years against a machine network whose core is the spirit of humanity. From this, it becomes clear that N2 is part of the machine network, which in turn appears to be heavily shaped by the information it absorbed about humanity. N2 itself confirms at least the former aspect through its own words. A question directed at Yoko Taro in the strategy guide further explores this human element of N2. It is said that the machine lifeforms absorbed the memory data of a certain human stored on the old quantum servers, and that the red girls, N2, were born from it. But who is this person? So N2 appears to be derived from the memories of a specific human being. However, Yoko Taro's response to the corresponding question is simply no comment. His answer once again emphasizes that this entity was deliberately designed to be cryptic. Elsewhere in the strategy guide, this person is described as the individual at the center of Project Gestalt, which most likely refers to NieR himself. Nevertheless, even under this assumption, there is no indication that N2 has inherited NieR's motivations or goals. Since N2 was not consciously created by another entity for a specific purpose, there is likewise no evidence of predictability by design either. Other motivations of N2 are also not always clear, in part due to the internal disagreements with N2 itself, which become apparent after A2's battle with the AI in the tower. During the fight, N2 splits into multiple units that disagree on how to deal with A2. One of N2's apparent goals is therefore its own cognitive and technological advancement, although there is disagreement about how this goal should be achieved. Regarding self-preservation, N2 declares to 9S in the tower, this could imply that N2 seeks to preserve itself and has already taken measures to place itself in an apparently secure position. However, when parts of N2 perceive A2 as a danger, they oppose risking self-preservation for the sake of further development, while other parts are willing to take the risk. This internal conflict leads to a battle within N2 itself, justified by the statement, the scene demonstrates that the different parts of N2 regard either self-improvement or self-preservation as the higher priority, and would therefore even fight one another if the other side hindered the achievement of each goal. The fragmentation and the self-destructive conflict ultimately lead to N2's annihilation. To what extent resource acquisition served as a motivation for N2 remains unknown, since N2 primarily resides within the tower, which, as previously mentioned, is responsible for the processing and informatization of resources gathered by resource collecting units. A connection between N2 and resource acquisition can at least be assumed. It remains unclear to what degree N2 is directly involved in or interested in this process though. Unlike the previous artificial intelligences, N2 therefore represents an AI with the potential to monitor and manipulate all events from the background according to its own will, intentions, and even whim. As such, this AI does not pose an immediate threat to a group such as humanity in terms of survival, but it could restrict their autonomy and independence. It is conceivable that N2 might be capable of eradicating a group like humanity, were it not, as in the game, to fall into conflict with itself before. The artificial intelligences in the NieR series can for the most part be classified within already existing models and popular representations of AI. Thus, NieR's artificial intelligences do not embody entirely new ideas. What stands out instead is the game's distinctive approach of creating a collage of different AI and robot representations which differ from each other in their audiovisual characteristics, behavior, motivations, end goals, and levels of threat. Most depictions of AI in NieR appear as controlled by their creators, though some break free from this dynamic and turn against them, while others remain mostly loyal. Meanwhile, with N2, an AI is portrayed as controlling from the very beginning. Even within the framework of motivations proposed by Ballström, different priorities can be observed among the various AI groups and individuals in the games. Cosima Wagner, a German Japanologist, concludes in her monograph Robotopia Nipponica that dystopian depictions of robots are not predominant in contemporary Japan. Despite Yoko Taro's somewhat negative statement in an interview that AI is merely a tool to extend human desires, his portrayal cannot be classified as explicitly dystopian. While AI in the NieR series can pose a danger to humanity, as demonstrated particularly by the Replicants and the machine Lifeforms, within the context of the game's lore it becomes evident that AI is not the sole threat to humankind. Instead, Yoko Taro appears to hold a fundamentally pessimistic view on humanity's future. In his narrative, humanity is doomed to perish, whether through a deadly pandemic, a hostile AI, or an alien invasion that forces the last surviving humans to flee to the moon. In this sense, the scenario depicted in the NieR series is dystopian, but not explicitly because of artificial intelligence. However, AI can contribute to this dystopia, as Yoko Taro's collage-like depiction illustrates that AI can evolve in both positive and negative directions for humanity. For this reason, NieR cannot be cited as an example supporting Wagner's claim without reservation. The not explicitly dystopian portrayal of AI in NieR is particularly evident in Project Gestalt, in which replicants, under the supervision of androids, are tasked with cleansing Earth of deadly pathogens to prevent the extinction of humanity. This demonstrates positive influences in AI in fields like healthcare, an area in which researchers from other disciplines also identify major benefits. In this scenario, an AI can eliminate deadly pathogens, a task impossible for humans, thereby delaying humanity's extinction. It is thinkable that without AI, humanity would have perished much earlier in this scenario. The Japanese government likewise emphasizes the positive aspect of such future technologies. Wagner notes in her study a targeted state promotion of next-generation robots and robotics technology by the Japanese government in the mid-2000s. According to her, these next-generation robots are intended to be used in service sectors such as surveillance, social services, and building maintenance. Ideally, they would also serve as domestic robots that enable elderly people to live independently in their own homes and allow women and mothers to participate in the workforce. The motivation behind this initiative stems not only from economic competition from South Korea and China, but also from Japan's demographic changes, that is, an aging population, the declining proportion of the working age population, and an overall shrinking populace. Using robot technologies, the Japanese government hopes to find solutions to rising social problems like labor shortages, overwork, manufacturing and agricultural productivity, medical services, nursing care, construction, and infrastructure maintenance. According to Wagner, migration policy remains a taboo topic in Japan, which is why the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry argues that next-generation robots offer a good solution to both the problems of labor shortages and migration policy. Robots, due to their positive image within Japanese society, are said to be more socially accepted than foreign workers. Indeed, robots enjoy a positive reputation in Japanese society. A major influence on this favorable perception is Tezuka Osamu's manga character Astro Boy, or Tetsuwan Otomu in Japanese, whose depiction is among the most widespread images of robots in post-war Japan, if not the single most dominant one. Ito Kenji, a sociologist specializing in technology, writes about the cultural perception of Astro Boy in Japanese society. In post-war Japan, Astro Boy symbolizes the nation's dream of the future, representing a technological utopia, and even today he continues to shape Japanese society's image of what a robot is. According to Wagner as well, Astro Boy remains the #1 model for robots as friends of humankind in Japan. Nowadays, manufacturers deliberately invoke Astro Boy to market their robots in a way that is socially acceptable and culturally resonant. Similar to robots, in the formulation of techno-ethical principles for the development and use of artificial intelligence in Japan, reference is made to AI's potential impact on the country's demographic challenges. The Japanese Society for Artificial Intelligence, or JSAI for short, recognizes in AI the potential to address Japan's declining birth rate and aging population, while the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare identifies AI as a key technology in healthcare, essential for tackling the challenges of an aging society and for realizing its health policy vision for 2035. Astro Boy's influence is also reflected in the drafting of these techno-ethical principles, as he receives explicit mention in the JSAI's 2017 guidelines. In Japan, the themes of AI, robotics, and fictional role models are deeply intertwined, so much so that techno-ethical principles and government initiatives are often designed in alignment with these cultural narratives in order to ensure their social legitimacy and acceptance. Although AI in NieR Replicant is able to delay the end of humanity, its ultimate failure, in which it ends up eradicating humanity directly despite cleansing the earth of deadly pathogens, serves as a critique of a techno-ethical scenario in which humankind places complete reliance on artificial intelligence. Plans such as those of the Japanese government and other governmental institutions, which envision Japan's societal future as resting primarily in the hands of emerging technologies like AI and robotics, and see them as the solution to demographic challenges, must therefore be critically examined in the light of Yoko Taro's narrative vision. Through Yoko Taro's collage-like depiction of artificial intelligence, individual AI systems exhibit a complexity that allows them to evolve in divergent directions even within the same AI type, highlighting a difficulty of predicting AI behavior. In his works, AI can indeed assist humankind, however, blind faith and total dependence on it are portrayed as misguided. Despite this critique though, Yoko Taro does not present an alternative to AI within this scenario. Without it, humanity would face certain extinction due to the deadly disease. Consequently, players may struggle to place these critiques within a broader context, which in turn could reinforce governmental plans such as those of the Japanese state by omitting alternative perspectives. A striking feature of Yoko Taro's portrayal is that the AIs in NieR rarely achieve their end goals. Popola and Devla fail to bring Project Gestalt to success, Project Yorha collapses, Eve's revenge ends in failure, and 9S's revenge succeeds only at the cost of his own life. Now, one might conclude that Yoko Taro paints a pessimistic picture of artificial intelligence, suggesting that AI cannot be sustainably successful or functional. Yet it is debatable to what extent this failure reflects Yoko Taro's perception of AI itself, given that his characters are marked by ambiguity, as they can also be interpreted as human, exploring human concepts through their actions, as previous research has shown. Depending on the interpretation, this failure may be a shared trait of both humans and artificial intelligences. This ambiguity implies that humans and AI share the potential to be very much alike. N2 actually touches upon this notion during its battle with A2, saying, As N2 then turns against itself due to internal disagreement, A2 comments, The consequence of this ambiguity is that the same ethical principles Yoko Taro applies to humans also extends to artificial intelligence, at least when it comes to artificial general intelligence. So if Yoko Taro depicts it as morally wrong to force humans into a traumatizing and deadly war, it is equally unethical to do the same to an artificial general intelligence, and vice versa. Therefore, the techno-ethical implications in NieR do not merely concern protecting humans from AI, but also protecting AI from humans. Yoko Taro's portrayal at least implies that artificial general intelligence should not be placed beneath humans, nor should anything be demanded of it simply because it is a machine. In the NieR games, artificial intelligences typically deviate from their assigned task when they experience a traumatic event or fail to achieve their end goal. For example, 9S loses control after witnessing 2B's death, A2 deserts from Project Yorha following her experiences during the Pearl Harbor descent in 11,941, and Pascal wishes to end his own existence after witnessing the destruction of his village and the extinction of its inhabitants. From this, it follows that, according to Yoko Taro's depiction of AI, an ethical space must be established in which AI is treated in such a way that it does not feel compelled to rebel against humanity or self-destruct. Accordingly, techno-ethical principles designed to protect humans from AI can only be successfully implemented if such concessions are made. However, NieR depicts only artificial general intelligence. It therefore remains unclear whether such an ethical space would also need to be created for artificial narrow intelligence or only once an AI reaches the level of an artificial general intelligence. If it does not need to be created for the former, then one must answer the normative question of when an AI should be regarded as a sentient being and how it ought to be treated based on that assessment. Through the framing of the androids and machine lifeforms in NieR Automata, as well as the subsequent deconstruction of that framing throughout the game, the narrative presents a simulation of the search for an answer to this question. Though it must be noted that Yoko Taro's initial framing guides the player's perception of the androids and machine lifeforms. Despite Yoko Taro's own stated wish that players should draw their own insights from his games, in this respect he leaves them little room to find an independent answer to this question. Meinbauer and Pola Grottmann ultimately conclude in their analysis of NieR Automata, "We cannot, at least without difficulties, argue that NieR Automata critically engages in Japan's wartime history. However, we can say that this game takes a critical stance against simplistic depictions of war in popular culture, and especially in digital games." A similar conclusion can be drawn regarding Yoko Taro's portrayal of artificial intelligence and his discussion of techno-ethical aspects. The NieR series presents AI in the form of a collage, aiming for a depiction that is as nuanced as possible. In doing so, NieR showcases a wide range of both positive and negative traits, scenarios, and potentials that can be associated with artificial intelligences. Unlike in the case of Japan's wartime history, Yoko Taro also engages, though implicitly, with techno-ethical questions that arise from his differentiated representation. However, the strong focus on the human qualities of the characters and the exploration of human concepts through robotic figures prove to be problematic in this regard, as they leave little room for a deeper engagement with the theme of artificial intelligence itself. Because the discussion of techno-ethical dimensions arises only implicitly from the relatively backgrounded theme, it tends to pass unnoticed by players, as it must be actively sought out. The large number of interview questions that focus on human concepts compared to those that address AI or technology, as well as the academic focus on human-centered interpretations and research on NieR, may serve as an indicator to this tendency. To assess whether the techno-ethical aspects present in the games ultimately resonate with the players, further research is needed, particularly studies that examine player reception in more depth. And with that, we've reached the end of the first video on this channel. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look on artificial intelligence in the NieR series. Analyses like that take quite some time to prepare, so if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate a like on the video. The next video is already in the works and will focus on Japanese video game consoles in South Korea, without giving too much away just yet. It'll likely be released around December or January, so if you don't want to miss that video, feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any further questions or discussion points about today's topic, feel free to share them in the comments. Alright, that's all from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!